Newest edition of Real Talk, where we put the real in real estate. And I've got my buddy, Danny Hardiman, back from Blue Crown Properties. Danny, you are the leasing and property management wizard, are you not, sir?
I don't know. Let's see. I think the shirt will tell you. Oh, yeah, I am. I don't have a hat. So the only thing I had was a shirt. So I just thought,
I love it.
Today is the day I finally get to wear this shirt.
Well, you know I'm a sucker for a good graphic t-shirt, so I approve. Hey, we appreciate
on here today, and we've got short-term rentals, long-term rentals, bills that are coming through. We've got a little, first things first, Danny was second, and what your background of property management.
Well, one thing I have to say right off the top, Ashley, is the audio is a little distorted on my end. So
okay,
to make you work. Can you guys hear me okay?
I can hear you perfectly.
Okay. You're coming through very, very like you are drugged up on drugs or something. So I can hear what you say.
We don't like that. Really... Hold on.
Okay. I see a comment in the chat too that Ashley's
okay. How about
just making sure it wasn't me and that
now?
Hey.
Okay. All right. Well, we don't want to be slow and digitized.
Look at Sherry. Sherry said, "I'm fine. I'm perfect."
Don't inflate his ego, Sherry. All right. That's what Bluetooth does for you. So we will do this sans AirPods today.
All right. So. See, go old school. I'm wired. I have to go wired.
I love it. Okay. So we're gonna start off again, and that was we're gonna talk about Mark Koretsky. No, not too many vodkas. Get out of here. I'm being good right now. We've got short-term rentals, long-term rentals, legislative issues. We've got some interesting House bills that are being worked through in committee right now. And so this is going to be a meaty episode, but that's the point. We're currently in session right now at the state level, and we wanted to bring up to date what's going on in your local municipalities and what's going on statewide. So Danny, give us a little bit of your background as to why you are the property management wizard, sir.
Well, I've been in property management professionally for almost 20 years, as this is my 19th year in the industry. I've always been one of those to be involved. I like to protect our private property rights. So I'm involved at the state level. I really stay within the boundaries of Texas. I don't really like to do much at the NAR level. I just feel my calling is at the local level and the state level. So This stuff is near and dear to my heart. This is a legislative year, so it's always exciting, but it could also be, we could get some bad stuff come down the pike too. So really excited to kind of dig into some of this and share with you and our listeners today, or viewers, whatever, some of the things that, we're looking at in Austin and some of the bills that are already been submitted that we're actively monitoring. I know right off the top, you wanted to jump into the STRs, right? The short-term rentals?
Short-term rentals. Yeah. We don't talk a lot about them a lot of times. And sometimes it's because it really is a niche area of the real estate business. And so Airbnbs, VRBOs, different platforms like that have really taken some steam over the last few years, especially over the last, 3 years specifically. And so, of course, when something gets popular, it also gets scrutinized. And so right now we've got short-term rentals on the chopping block in a lot of our local municipalities. There's actually been ordinances in several of the cities already. I know Grapevine has one, and that's actually, I think even there's several lawsuits that are going on right now through Grapevine. Arlington has a short-term rental policy that only allows short-term rentals in the tourism district because they identify with the stadiums and Texas Live and all of those places that's an appropriate place to function an Airbnb. But outside of that, in a single family residence neighborhood, they are prohibited. So we've got, what happened is that really happened. They were one of the first ones that kind of cracked down. And as we see, there's really no new ideas in local government or real estate. And so what happens, hey, Arlington, you guys have done this before. We're looking at doing something similar. How did you arrive at this destination? And so that's actually going on right now in Plano. they actually kind of pivoted for a minute and delayed the vote on short-term rentals in Plano. There was a crime instance in a single-family neighborhood, and so that's really what spurred on. And that's what spurred on a lot of this is a crime will occur, and then everybody deems that it's the Airbnb short-term rental VRBO. It's the issue of the short-term rental. It's not the issue of the crime, right? Which I'm not saying that that's always the case, but we have a lot of crimes in parks, and we don't get rid of our parks, and so that just sometimes an area of opportunity to see what we can do to help serve our communities, not necessarily legislate. And I think that's what's going on here. So Plano is actually looking at restricting short-term rentals in a similar fashion, potentially just like Arlington. So they are consulting with the people that Arlington consulted with, trying to do some research. They don't want to be too hasty on the decision, but they're throwing out there because Plano is not a tourist destination in the same capacity. We are a corporate destination for many corporations across the country. And so they're touring with the idea that short-term rentals would be restricted to a radius around the corporate headquarters that we see around Plano. So that's kind of what's going on right now. I know Fort Worth has some things going on hot and heady. They too have had an ordinance in place since 2018. In fact, one of the gentlemen from the Fort Worth Short-Term Rental Alliance saw what we were doing here this evening and reached out to me today. And I had a fantastic conversation with him and understanding what's going on there, where they are in their process. So they had the ordinance. It wasn't being enforced over the past couple of years, and now it's coming back to the stage. Yes, Abigail, Dallas is absolutely working on this too. So they're coming back to stage to vote on enforcement, what the enforcement looks like, because theirs is currently mixed use. So they're not tourism. They didn't, they're using the mixed use vernacular and doing that. And so look, there are attorneys involved. They are going at the state level, just like we're talking about, House bills that are going for some long-term ordinances and different things like that. That's what they're trying to do on the short-term side as well, is get a statewide, legislation policy instead of it being an individual municipality. Because what do we say, Danny? It's all about individual property owners' rights. And that's why you and I are on here tonight. So can you talk about why we say that? Because I think some people think that's what we put on loop is individual property owners' rights, but there's so much that goes behind that we need to be careful with that slippery slope.
Right. And it is a slippery slope, right? You don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, right? You hear one negative thing, and that's going to tarnish, the whole concept of short-term rentals. My position, first of all, full disclosure, I don't do short-term rentals. I only professionally manage long-term rentals. So I'm a little out of my sandbox here, but this has been, a challenging hot potato in our industry for 5-6 years now.
Yeah.
We're nowhere near figuring out what the solution is. I don't know what the solution is, but I am a firm believer in private property rights and protecting our fundamental right to lease our property. Because that's part of the bundle of rights of real estate, right? Yep. And you don't want to voluntarily give that up, right? I mean, people aren't thinking about the long-term ramifications of that as well. So I don't know what the right answer is here. I like some of these models that we're hearing that these cities are going to, where you've got, business districts, entertainment districts and whatnot. But I still think that we need to realize that short-term rentals have been occurring since the beginning of time. Yeah. Think about that, right? Travelers walking, thousands of years ago, going across Europe, they stop at an inn, they rent a room for a short-term rental or somebody's house, So short-term rentals has been around since the beginning of time, or beginning of mankind. So that's something that, I think people lose sight of because we hear of some of these very, minor things that happen or one-off things that happen that just makes it toxic to an entire city, a community, or a state. I don't know if we're going to see anything at the state level anytime soon. Yeah. I think the state is going to continue to punt to the municipalities. But it is going to be an interesting topic for us to debate, I think, for many more years to come.
Well, and I think people need to realize there are a lot of different reasons why maybe just an individual owner decides to leverage their own personal property, their own personal home as an Airbnb. And that's part of it too. You know, property taxes are extraordinarily high, and we've been blessed to live in an area where our values just continue to increase. But specifically in areas like Dallas and even in Fort Worth, where there are a lot of older properties with accessory dwellings, garage apartments, different things like that that are very conducive to short-term rental advantages. And so I know specifically in Dallas, there are a lot of people that have used that opportunity to help offset the growing increase of property taxes to be able to stay in their home. So we always look at it as it's a party house, and that's not really the case. Maybe it's you sit there and you've got 2 young children, and it's easier for you to be in a single family home when you're visiting your relatives 2 miles away versus being in a really expensive hotel with not the same amenities to be able to travel with your family. I think we just zone in on all of it's always right. The smaller things, the very few things get the loudest on the media channels. And so I think what it is though is individual property owners' rights, and we always need to come back to that, what that looks like. So you brought up something to me that San Antonio kind of has an interesting model that they've figured out. And while they're not exactly like some of our areas in North Texas, they've kind of found a compromise. So talk about what San Antonio adopted.
Yeah. So, Ashley and I were talking about this before the show. I found this model rather interesting. San Antonio enacted a model, and forgive me, I have not read the ordinance at all. So I don't know what the how, if it's a neighborhood, if it's a, one building or what, but they have a ratio. And when they first launched it, it was 1 out of 12. If it's a non-owner occupied property, 1 out of 12, within a subdivision, within a certain distance, within a building, I don't know exactly, but it was 1 out of 12 could get a permit for short-term rentals. I think it was 2021. They actually made it even easier. They went to 1 out of every 8.
Okay.
And it seems to be working well in San Antonio. So I found that interesting. They also have no restrictions against if it is your homestead. You are an owner occupant. It's unlimited, the number of people that can be allowed to, do a short-term rental in their property. I don't know if that model would work in Dallas-Fort Worth because, as many of you know, if you know geography of San Antonio, they don't have a lot of suburbs.
Yeah.
And we're the hotbed up here in North Texas that we have so many suburbs and everyone's doing things a little bit differently. So I don't know if that type of model would work here. I did find it interesting, though, and that it's actually gotten easier to be a short-term rental versus harder, which it seems like we're seeing everywhere else in the state.
Yeah, no, it is really interesting. And I think what it is so often we think it has to be a unilateral decision. It's either yes, short-term rentals or no short-term rentals. And I think what San Antonio has done is been able to find a compromise. And I will tell you, in speaking to a lot of short-term rental coalitions and alliances and groups and rent responsible groups, they are open to conversation. They're just not being invited to the conversation a lot of the times. And I think there's things, there are strikes, there are, extensive reporting. There's all of these things that short-term rental platforms institute with their hosts. But there's a lot that's going on. All right, Peggy, neither of you has mentioned the horrible nuisances that happens in the neighborhoods, misery, noise, and noise debauchery allowed by poor management of short-term rentals. These bad actor managers ruin it for the good managers and many responsible property owners. You know what? Absolutely. And guess what? The same can be said about, owner occupants. The same can be said about long-term tenants. And I think that's the hard part is there are always going to be bad actors. You are absolutely right, Peggy. But there are also a lot of good people and good programs or platforms that are adhering to those rules and have much stricter rules in compliance than in a long-term rental situation in a lot of situations. And so not taking away that there have been problems, and I'm not saying it's a perfect solution, but what we do have to consider is that individual property owners' rights are something that we all have to make sure that we keep our eye on. Like I said, doesn't have to be a unilateral decision, yes or no. If we can come to the table with conversation, compromise, and some results, then I think that's a win-win for everybody. Not everyone has to lose. So appreciate your comment, Peggy. And I appreciate your conjecture as well, Danny.
And if I might just add on to that, Peggy, that's why I say we don't know the answer to this.
Yeah.
This is a topic that there's pros and cons to both sides. My position is, kind of to Ashley's point, is you can have those same issues and challenges with homeowners and long-term renters as you can short-term renters. Fully leverage, the laws and the ordinances already on the books to equalize the enforcement across the board. But you're right, there are some bad actors out there. And it's unfortunate that these, the very small amount of bad actors are seemingly making this a toxic situation for everyone and making this out to be portrayed as such a negative solution.
Yep. No, understood. And I think that that's a great segue in going into some of the other things that are going, because there are situations that might need additional legislation at the state level. You said we are in session right now, Danny, which is an exciting time, but we also have to keep our eyes on a lot of things that are coming down the pike because of circumstances, whether they be with short-term rentals or rental registration or landlord-tenant relationships and everything else. And so we're going to spend the next few minutes kind of geeking out, as Danny likes to say, and talking about the specific bills that we are keeping our eye on. Now, this means somebody has proposed this bill. It's in a committee. They're looking at it. They're working on it. It could have just been for dramatics, but nonetheless, we are still keeping our eye on it. So, Danny, if you want to start with the first one, and I'll kind of let you go through just a little bit of this list.
Yeah, sure. So, the one of the main topics we wanted to cover tonight is, a legislative update. It's a little too early in the year to give you a good legislative update, because bills are still being introduced. But there's already a slew of them in leasing and property management that we're monitoring. I'm a dork, so I love reading all of these and laughing at them and rolling my eyes at them. And it's very, very rare, but I'll go, that's a good one, right?
Yeah.
So I had to narrow it down, and I picked, how many did I pick, Ashley? 7. Okay.
Yeah.
So I picked 7. So I'm kind of proud of myself. I had a lot more, but that's really too nerdy and you guys would really laugh at me. I do want to make everybody aware that if you are a member of Texas Realtors and you're watching tonight, our public policy positions are available to you on the Texas Realtors website. I don't know if we're able to drop that link in the chat or not, but you can go out there and see, where we stand as the realtor party, right? What our stance is across the various issues that are impacting real estate. So we're going to just talk a little bit about some of these House bills that are already been submitted that we are monitoring. And when I say we, I mean Texas Realtors are monitoring. We're going to start with House Bill 1048. Now, let's also put a little caveat to this discussion. Some of these may not even make it out of committee. In fact, many of them may not make it out of committee. But if they do, we really need to keep our eyes on them. So we're already monitoring them. We're already giving feedback from our stance on them. And I just want to make you guys aware, and we can laugh together at a lot of these. Okay. So
let's start off with this one, Danny.
Yeah. And I think it's in your chat now. So if you want to bookmark that, there is your Texas Realtors policy positions for this legislative session. Okay. HB 1048. So this bill is specifying that there must be a written process for rent increases, and not just saying your now rent is now this, but they're saying you must do it 7 days before the time that a tenant has to give notice that they're not renewing. So to make it easier for you, let's say it says 30 days in the lease, you must give 30 days notice, right? You as the owner, 37 days before that, must give them written notice of the rental increase, and you must put in writing all of the improvements you've made at the house to justify the rent increase. Now, Ashley and I have had fun with this. What did you think about that one, Ashley?
Well, here's my deal. In the land of increased taxable value in this great state of Texas, where our landlords don't actually have the benefit of the homestead cap year over year. Yeah, Sherry said no. That's really difficult because increased taxes would not constitute an improvement. I don't know anybody who thinks taxes are an improvement. But that right there is, we've done the study on our end. In Dallas alone, I think we calculated it was a minimum of like 35%.
30 to 35%.
Yeah, 35% went from the rent actually was applied to taxes. So that means over a third, over a third of the rent was just purely taxes. That's not talking about our drastic insurance premium increases because of all of the weather-related damages and things of that nature. So taxes and insurance are the variable that increases our mortgage year over year. And that is not something that a landlord is going to subsidize. That's a part of living in the property. So I understand a $600 increase on a $1,200 property, but I don't understand increasing it for taxes, which that wouldn't constitute an improvement.
And what you're also not taking into account is other expenses have increased too.
Mm-hmm.
Insurance has increased because the replacement costs have increased.
Yep.
Right. So your premiums are going up there as well. I agree with you, Abigail. I mean, improvements that in no way, shape, or form is that more property taxes, but
Right.
I don't think that one's going anywhere. We just thought we'd share it with you guys. We'll get a laugh together on that one. Let's look at a House Bill 1056. Okay, now this one we found a little interesting and we had a little eye roll for. So this one essentially is going to create a statewide registry of investment firms who own and operate residential rental property. The proposed bill will have the comptroller maintain a database. Now, I know what my thoughts are. Ashley, you agreed with it. So what do you think about this one?
Wow, another database. That sounds fun. And it sounds like they're trying to do something for us. But Danny, you made the comment that it's more of a ploy towards statewide rental registration.
That's the way I'm looking at it.
How are they going to differentiate an individual landlord versus an investment firm? That will have to be some sort of reporting across the board.
I don't see any logic behind this. I mean, it's public record who the owner is.
Yeah.
So I don't see what this is going to accomplish. Like, I don't see what was the why behind it, and that's what was the genesis of this bill. I don't think it's going to go anywhere, but like I said in my bullet points here, it just feels like a statewide rental registration, right? Because all of our cities in Dallas-Fort Worth are coming up with rental registration programs, which we are opposed to, by the way. We're not getting in that today's topic, but that's just what it feels like to me. So I just found that one interesting.
And I get it. And Krishna, these firms are rampant and they are growing by the day, but at the same time, we have to be careful in an effort to, increase the capability of an individual to be able to procure property here. We can't restrict and regulate to the point where it hurts everyone across the board. And yes, Sherry hit the nail on the head. Registry is ridiculous, government overreach. And so we have to keep on going back to those things. Yes, you might not like these investment firms snatching up the properties. However, we actually did some research in Texas, and the reporting numbers on the actual investment firm ownership versus, more of an individual property owner, a smaller situation like that, it's not as unequally yoked as we think, especially in different areas, different price points. But what happens is we all get sick and tired of seeing it, and I get it. But a registry is not going to thwart it. If you think an investment firm cares that they have to register, they don't. So
I would also say, how do you define it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, an investment firm or a corporate entity, that could just encapsulate one property, right? You and I could create an
LLC.
entity.
Yeah.
And if they then define it, they're going to find loopholes around it, right?
Yes.
If they say, well, this investment firm must, have 50 properties in the state of Texas. Okay, well, they'll create a series of entities that hold 49, right? I mean, so they'll just, it's just going to be a game of chasing your tail.
Cutting off the head of the snake.
Yeah, I don't see that going anywhere, but I do agree, Krishna. Yeah, institutional buyers, they are coming in. But I just don't think this is good for business in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
Okay, moving on. Next one, 1057. This one requires properties to be listed for sale for 30 days before an investment firm is allowed to submit an offer for purchase. Now, this was written by the same representative, as you can probably
Shocking.
guess.
Yes.
What do you think about that one, Ashley?
Well, I was around in, the unfortunate foreclosure crisis that was 2007 or 2008, 9, 10 and everything else. And I remember the REOs, that was a big thing where it had to be listed. I think it was like 2 weeks and give owner occupants an opportunity before an investor. And they didn't define what an investor was. It was just somebody that was not procuring it with an owner occupant type of loan. So I think that's great as an initiative of giving an owner occupant the ability to gain affordable housing. And obviously foreclosures were more affordable. But it's different. I think, like we've discussed, we're a fiduciary. Sherry's just on a roll. Government overreach again. For me and for you, you put this down. You said this goes against the free market of selling to the best possible buyer. And as a fiduciary, and this is crammed down our throats at every turn, it is our job to procure the best deal for our sellers, which is why we have clear cooperation policies with our MLS. We have a lot of different things that we do to make sure we garner that. So again, an institutional buyer might be the best buyer in certain circumstances. They're able to pay cash sometimes. There's not long waiting periods with loans and things like that nature. If somebody is in a more distressed, situation, we are not seeing an uptick in foreclosures, but there are still people that can't afford to stay in their homes that haven't improved them over the past several years. They might have equity, but they don't have the money to improve the property. And I think that's what we have to think about, is that your grandmother that's lived down the street for 30 years, she's taking great care of the property, but she hasn't made any cosmetic improvements. And she turns around and she says, you know what? I really can't afford to live here anymore. I'm going to cash in on the equity. My house is paid off. The normal individual buyer that comes in, they can't spend $100,000 to do cosmetic updates and maybe some, system updates and things of that nature. But an investor can, and an institutional buyer can. And in that circumstance, that was best for grandma. So I think everything is unique, and to make an erroneous policy across the board that says 30 days with no exceptions is absolutely overreach once again. And I think it's more for splash and awe than it is really trying to get this one out of committee.
I can't add anything to that because everything you just said, I 100% agree with you on. Let the seller decide, right? It's their property, right? They can make the best decision for them. This is a free market, a free economy.
Yes.
Let the seller decide.
100%.
Okay. Next one, House Bill 1148. This one is going to propose to repeal the state ban on municipalities' ability to prohibit a property owner from rejecting tenants based on source of income. Housing vouchers is essentially what is, the genesis of this bill. So many of you may or may not be aware of this, but you can reject someone based upon source of income, meaning you do not have to take Section 8. Yep. The purpose of this bill is to repeal that law so that you can't take into account source of income. I've been punning to you on all of my, of all your opinions. I'll give you mine, first of all. Yes. The Section 8 program serves a purpose. It's for some people it works. I've got clients that they're 100%. They want Section 8. They feel like they're doing a service. They're providing housing, to people that truly need it. And I applaud them for that. Yep. I just don't think that you should statutorily force someone to do a deal with the government, because you have to sign a contract. If you do a Section 8 tenant, you have to sign a contract with the government. It's an amendment that goes on, an addendum that goes on your lease agreement. And I don't like that. I think you should be able to properly select your own tenant, irregardless of source of income. So I like the law the way it is. I don't think that we need to force someone to do Section 8 when they don't want to, because let's face it, there are a lot of negatives to doing Section 8. So that's my opinion on this House bill.
Yeah, as Gabriel said, I think it's hilarious when bureaucrats try to determine what other people can do with one's own property. And that's, again, going into an agreement with the government is exactly as such. And there are, so Christian is asking, does this include SSI?
I'll have to go back and look at the bill. There's a link to the bill. I think we did put it in the chat. Krishna, if you want to go pull it up.
Yeah. So pull up the bill. And Tony, I get it. You sit there, and I too, I like to call it asset management. I work with a lot of investors, and so I will help them acquire and manage the property at the same time. Danny is a large property owner in the Metroplex, and I have, just in my small pool, some that are fine with it and some that aren't. I will also tell you there are certain counties or certain areas that are better to deal with. I remember way back in the day in Dallas, they would run out of money in Dallas County sometimes. And so that's nothing that you can do to penalize a tenant. And that might have been updated, but you are restricted in certain capacities. And again, it might not be in the best interest of an individual property owner to take some of the risk on timing or anything else. And that should be left up to an individual property owner to decide. So
if I could just add on to that, I don't want it to come across that I'm horrible and I'm against Section 8. I'm not, because I'm reading some of the comments here, and there's pros and cons to both sides of the Section 8 argument. My takeaway is forcing a property owner to have to take that into account, but also if you are forcing an owner to consider Section 8, you're also forcing an owner to change his contract, because you now have to utilize the contract terms of the program itself. And a lot of people, if you've ever gone through that process, are not in line with the government. The government can flat out stop paying you rent if they deem one thing that needs to be repaired on that property. And it can be debated back and forth if it's a tenant caused issue or if it's a landlord responsibility. And they can hold back your rent if you don't go fix it, no matter whose fault it is. And a lot of owners just don't want that level of intrusion into their business. Again, I have clients on both sides, and I see, the pros and cons to both sides, and it should be up to the individual. That's just my stance on it. I don't think we need to, get the government involved on it, but we could spend a whole hour, and maybe we will one of these days, going over the pros and cons of these type of solutions, because I love healthy debate on both sides of this.
Amen. I like how Abigail says it: better a carrot than a stick. Give owners a reason for wanting to accept housing vouchers. And I think that's also a great way to sit there and look at it. Hey, there's a tax subsidy. There's something else, for people that are willing to do that. But I think that's a great comment there, that we shouldn't necessarily hogtie somebody to amend a contract. And I like that's the way that you put it, Danny, is that you would have to amend the contract and then also add the government as a party to it. And so I think we need to go on to the next one, because we still have several more things to touch.
Oh yeah. I'm gonna skip some of these that I don't think are that relevant. Let's go down to House Bill 1262.
Okay.
This one will allow notice to vacates to be delivered electronically if the landlord and tenant agree to it. I think this is fantastic. Okay.
Finally.
I've been bashing a lot of these.
Yes.
I mean, it makes sense. We're so far behind on that. Our lease allows us to communicate electronically on everything else except for a notice to vacate. I think that is just silly. And in the age of safety, right? I mean, you hear all these nightmare stories of agents across the country, getting shot or getting attacked. Landlords getting killed, being on properties. I think it's just the smart thing to do, is to allow electronic delivery of notices. So what do you think, Ashley?
That was my thing, was in an age where we just don't need to take unnecessary risk, and electronic, a lot of times electronic portals are being utilized to pay rent, to make maintenance requests, to do anything else like that. We have email, tracking to make sure that something's been delivered appropriately. We can even know when it's been opened. So I actually think it's much more effective to do electronic communication than to actually hand deliver something, because you're not hand delivering it. You're posting it on a door or sending it, yes, in certified mail. But I lost certified mail last month, by the way, for 3 weeks. So we were waiting for a cashier's check for a deposit for somebody out of state on a rental property. And they were able to electronically go through the portal and pay the landlord the rent, but it took 3 extra weeks to track down certified mail. Yes.
No, you can't trust the Postal Service anymore. God bless them, but you can't. That's for sure. So I think that's an excellent one. I hope it passes.
Yes.
The last one we're going to touch on, this one's near and dear to my heart because it's going to segue us nicely into our next topic. But this is House Bill 673. It's basically codifying the notice of opportunity to cure before sending a notice to vacate. So just real quick, at Eviction 101 in Texas, you have to send them a notice to vacate document, which we just talked about sending it electronically. Hopefully that comes true. What this would require you to do is you have to send basically a notice to cure, right? So you have an opportunity, and the bill says a notice to cure of 7 days. So you have to send a notice saying you haven't paid your rent, and then wait 7 more days, and then you send your notice to vacate. I'm not on board with this. I think it's just going to delay, the inevitable. I think it's also going to have an indirect impact on more affordable housing, because I think it's going to have landlords tighten their strings in even further on their tenant selection criteria. If you've even had 1 30-day late, they may not rent to you because they know how much longer it's going to be to get possession of their property back if you don't pay. So you have any thoughts on that, Ashley?
Well, I was just asking, so Sherry's asking for clarification. So is it the 3-day notice to pay or quit goes to 7, or is it 10 days total? You can do the 3-day and then 7 extra.
Okay. So that's not correct, Sherry. So what they're proposing in the bill is you have to send them a notice to cure document. Basically, you need to pay your rent, right? And then you have to wait 7 days. And if they haven't paid their rent, then you send the notice to vacate. And then you wait the allotted time before you're allowed to go file in court. So it's just extending the process even further. I don't like this at all. I just think it's going to make it even harder to rent properties if this is codified.
Well, if a landlord has to go through it even one time, it completely is a paradigm shift in how they want to approach that. And I think that's what people need to understand. A 10-day period might not sound like a lot to everyone, but that could mean the difference in actually getting on the docket for that same month or getting pushed to the next month in some circumstances. And when you're talking about losing, mortgages don't wait. That's what it all comes down to. The landlords are still having to pay the mortgage. No, it's not, Tani. They're not 3 days to and adding 4. It's actually a 7-day cure period before they can even file the 3-day. So it's really 10. And so that's minimum. 10 minimum is what we're looking at there. And so people just need to have to understand, and we're going to segue into, some of this post-COVID fallout and talk about it more. But the purpose of that is the self-fulfilling prophecy. The legislators are not looking, whether they're state or local, 5 steps ahead as to what this is going to do if they make more restrictive covenants for landlords to be able to actually garner what is owed to them. Yes, not necessary. Appreciate that. So let's segue into our lovely post-COVID fallout and the leasing and property management. So Danny, take us into that section of what we're looking at has kind of happened because of all of this.
Sure. So we saved that House Bill 673 for last because it kind of plays into what the city of Dallas is doing. So if you have rental property in the city limits of Dallas, they actually do have a temporary ordinance in place. Now, if you recall, if you've been doing business in the city of Dallas, there was an ordinance put in place during the COVID years, which made you send out a 21-day notice of possible eviction. So you had to send a notice of possible eviction for 21 days and then wait 21 days, and then you could send your notice to vacate. Okay, so that drew this process out. it never went away because it was tied to the governor's emergency order.
Right.
And as long as there was an emergency order, it was going to go on forever. So they did finally change it. This happened in November. There's a new temporary ordinance that they're trying to make permanent. The temporary ordinance now requires a 10-day notice. So we've gone from 21 to 10, so we're going in the right direction. But it's very similar to that proposed House bill. You have to send them a notice of possible eviction. I think we can drop the link. There it is. The link's in their chat if you don't know about this.
Yep.
So you have to go 10 days. If they apply for rental assistance and they can prove it to you, you have documentation that they've applied, then you must give them 60 days before you can proceed with the next step in the eviction, meaning the notice to vacate. It's a step in the right direction. I still think it's not something we need to see permanent on the books. I think the way that the eviction process is set up in property code has worked very, very well. And I think the average landlord is not in the business of wanting to evict anyway.
Absolutely
So,
not.
the overwhelming majority of landlords worked with their tenants. They actually did. You hear the one-off stories, but it worked. We got through it okay.
Yep.
And so we do have this temporary ordinance on the books. They are trying to make it permanent. They had a city hall or town hall meeting on it so we could give feedback. It was during the ice storm, so I don't know if I was planning on going, but I don't know when that's going to be. So we're continuing to monitor that, but just keep in mind, you do have a temporary ordinance in the city of Dallas. That is what I call post-COVID fallout. As far as I'm sorry, go ahead, Ashley.
I think Sherry actually made a really good comment and said you can't label institutional owners as the bad guys and at the same time penalize the individual owners. And I think that right there hit the nail on the head as to what we're trying to look at and do. So yes, absolutely, that there is a large, vast population of the property owners that are renting out their properties and actively being landlords are smaller mom and pop investors and landlords. And they're not always the ones, at least the ones I work with a lot of the times are ones that just understand that the difference between building generational wealth and a good retirement plan is owning real estate. It doesn't mean that they're daddy warbucks and have dollar bills falling out of their pockets. It means they save accordingly. They're pragmatic. They budget. They want to buy a property once every year, a couple of years, because that's what they're going to do to set themselves up for success. And I think that's what we're being tone deaf about is we're listening to the tenants' advocates, not necessarily the tenants. But we're not actually talking to any of the property owners. So I'm going to get off my soapbox for just a second so we can go on to one of the other issues.
We could go on. We could do another whole show on City of Dallas. But
yes.
I just hope they see the long, if you see the long game, this is bad policy. It's going to ultimately have less landlords in the City of Dallas. You already hear about almost selling all their properties as it is. Available quality rental properties are disappearing because people don't want to deal with the City of Dallas and these rules. Another post-COVID fallout, assistance money is pretty much gone. These buckets of cash that we've all been pulling from in our industry have dried up. There's still some trickling in. So you might find some. I love how they tied the Dallas ordinance to, they call it a QRAP, Qualified Rental Assistance Program. But the link on their actual ordinance, unless they updated it, you go to it and it says there's no money left.
Yeah.
So, that's good for us as a landlord, but there's just not a lot of money still out there. We still see some trickling in across the board. If you guys know of places that have money available, please share it with everybody in the chat here because that can help us property managers or landlords on this call. Evictions. I know we're talking about the process for submitting the notices and whatnot. Evictions are continuing to be a problem.
Yes.
We're seeing issues across the boards. There's a lot of tenants' rights advocates out there. There's a lot of pro bono representation. You're seeing these attorney groups that are sitting, literally camping out at the courthouses and saying, "Hey, do you have representation? Okay, I got you." And they're getting representation walking in the door. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I think it's a fantastic thing. I think tenants should know their rights. But on the flip side, I hold landlords to a higher standard. You should know the laws too. So
Yes.
if you've actually done everything correctly, you shouldn't have any problems in court. There's a lot of landlords throwing up their hands that they lost a case because they had the other side of representation. That's how the system's supposed to work, right? Let the facts be presented, and the judge will make a decision there. So I don't think the tenant rights advocates are a bad thing. Are they a thorn in some people's side? Yes, they are. They're not in ours, though, because we do things the right way.
Well, and Danny, let's that right there. And that's why you are you're an educator, you're an advocate for your industry, and you hold not only Blue Crown properties to a higher standard, but those that you are speaking to right now, we want to do the same. And that's the biggest thing is, what are the biggest loopholes we're seeing? Because people want to save money by not leveraging an experienced property manager. So, and again, for people, this is a price that obviously can be negotiated, but it is not an exorbitant fee to leverage a property manager. But what individual property owners and landlords don't realize is there is a very large statute of property code, and that has to do with a lot of nuances, whether it's delivering notices, whether it's the type of communication, whether it's having peepholes or tenant locks. You schooled me on that, Danny, in our properties, because those are things that they're finding, because that's what the individual landlord and property owners that aren't leveraging an expert are missing. And there's no landlord for dummies 101. Make sure you have a peephole and a tenant lock.
Yeah, and like I said, I believe in tenants having representation. I believe it's bringing the entire dichotomy of the tenant-landlord relationship up a level, because a lot of these rubber stamp judgments that landlords have been getting for years are now coming to light more in the media, especially during COVID and post-COVID. So I think it's wonderful. I just think everyone on this call needs to task themselves with being fully educated on the process and making sure their owners. Every landlord thinks they can do this themselves, right? And I always tell them, I go, you don't know what you don't know. All right. Like I schooled Ashley on something she didn't even know.
Yep.
And, people are losing on the most simple things like proper notice. They don't know how to do it. So in today's eviction world, if you don't know what you're doing, invest in an attorney or hire a property manager to do it. I'm telling you, you're gonna have a higher chance of winning your case versus doing it yourself.
I want to, Tani, I appreciate that there are bad landlords out there that don't follow property code and are unfair to tenants, just as, we're talking about tenants not following the confines of the contract. I think what we can go back to, though, is that there's responsibility on both sides.
Oh, I think we lost Ashley. Can anyone still hear me? Can somebody put something in the chat?
I'm back. Am I back?
I thought it was me.
No.
I'm sitting here going, did I lose internet? Okay, sorry.
No, we're just at the end, and it's like everybody's starting to explode. But no, hey, look at all the people chiming in though.
Hey, all the lurkers, welcome.
Yes, but you know what? I am back. Woo, it's magic. Here's the biggest deal. The education needs to go across the board, and there's accountability across the board. And just because you're a tenant doesn't mean that you don't need to advocate for yourself as well. And there's a lot of clues a lot of times when you're going through the rental process of even trying to find a property. If the process is arduous and the communication is not good to begin with, if you get a bad feeling that this landlord is not going to be a good landlord and be responsible and advocate for you, a lot of times you can just tell by the property condition when you're going to look at it. We still have to be responsible and advocate for ourselves on both sides. Tenants need to be good advocates for themselves, and landlords need to be better at what they're doing. And by doing that, they just need to leverage an experienced property manager. And there has never been a time that has never been so true. So if you are an individual property owner that is being your own landlord, I would just caution you with this. having an experienced property manager is a heck of a lot cheaper than having to deal with the nuances of not being able to evict a tenant properly or being found, in violation or something else. That's being penny wise and dollar dumb. So we can all do better on both sides of the aisle, but we have to understand, going back to all the things that we talked about, that doesn't mean that the government always has to get involved. There's other things that we can do to professionally hold everyone to a higher standard. Hey, what about this question? What measure do you determine a good property manager? That's a good ambiguous question for you, Danny.
I love that. That's a great question. First of all, I like to, if I was a landlord interviewing property managers, I would find the answer to maybe 3 basic tenant landlord law items and school them on it. Because, what I always say is, why do surgeons make the most money, right? Because they've spent their entire life studying and honing their craft and being the most educated person, right? So you're not paying for the procedure, you're paying for all those years that they spent educating themselves on how to do that procedure. And that's the same in property management too. I always say property manager is a very generic term. What does that even mean, right? It's defined differently by different people. But, you're basically paying me for what I've learned over the last 2 decades. I can get you out of this one issue that's actually going to make you more money over time. And so, I think you need to be looking for the most educated person in the room. And that may, like I said, start with finding the answer to 2 or 3 basic questions and ask that person at the other end of the conversation if they know the answer to them. If they don't, run, because you're turning over a 6 or 7 figure asset to a property manager who may ride that asset right into the ditch, and you don't want that to happen. I always say that the best property managers earn every penny they make. They actually make you more money, right? So your ROI should go up over time. If you're dialed in on there's a fee involved, I think you're looking at it wrong. Because
Danny, it's funny. They'll hire somebody to come mow their yard, which I'm not saying is an easy task, especially in the Texas heat. But I think it's a little easier to mow your own dadgum yard than it is to property manage with a Texas property code that's a stack thick and having judicial outcomes in it. So if you don't mow your own lawn, but you decide to property manage on your own, maybe you should flip the script just a little bit. Maybe that's just my little tidbit of information.
I agree.
Yep. So Gabriel, no, Danny does not manage short-term rentals.
That's a whole nother sandbox I do not want to stick my toe in.
Yes. Now, and that's the whole point, is that you stay in the lanes that you are proficient in, that you have educated yourself in, and that's super popular. So if you have a niche product, a niche rental product, make sure that you're aligning with the right property manager too. That's something that's important. Short-term rentals and long-term rentals are a completely different animal. Make sure that you find somebody that can do that appropriately. So we've only got a few minutes left. I've already done my disappearing act and have a digitized voice in the morning or in the beginning. So hopefully in the next few minutes, we won't have an issue, but let's just talk about what do you think we're going to see in 2023? Forecast maybe on rents, some policies, things that we can look forward to here in the near future.
Yeah. So, we chatted a little bit before this call about this, and I mean, it's been a fun ride, guys, hasn't it? The last couple of years. I hope you guys made a fortune. I mean, for those of you that do sales, I mean, it was fun until those rates went up. Yeah. It's been fun on our side of the fence too. Rents have just skyrocketed as sale prices have, seeing these 10% increase year over year, 15%, 20%. I mean, the numbers have been astronomical.
Yeah.
The music stops, right? I mean, it's got to stop. That's not sustainable. That's not a healthy market. So, what I'm advising our clients on, rents we're already seeing they're flattening out. Days on market is creeping up just a little. I mean, not a lot, but we're seeing it more than it used to be. Where something used to last 7 to 14 days, it may be 14 to 28 days.
Yep.
So it is creeping up a little bit. I think another issue is with rents softening, just like sales prices softening, is, everything else is slow to react. So now you've got these clients that have these sky high property taxes, right? They've got this sky high insurance premium. The cost of maintenance has gone up, inflation, everything has gone up, but rents are coming back down. So, our clients aren't happy with a lot of this. And I think it's going to get more challenging, as we progress further into 2023. So, I'm going to put my prediction out there that, we're going to stay pretty flat. You're going to see still incremental increases. This is a good time to be telling your clients about protesting their property taxes, because we've got to get those numbers back down to help make, this rent more competitive. So that's going to be a challenge. The latest data that I have, I haven't seen the January data, the December data. I found this very interesting. Executed leases were up 22% year over year from last year, which makes a lot of sense, right? We're still seeing a lot of leasing. Here's the one that I found really interesting. Active listings were up 108% year over year. That also tells me the sales market's slowing down. So people are shifting, and there's a lot of pivoting, to rental as well. So you've got a lot more competition on the market as well. And that usually does what? That's going to bring prices down. So, be preparing your clients for both of those action items, because that's kind of how I see 2023 going.
Now, this isn't necessarily your space either, Danny, but do you have anything in regards to a forecast on corporate furnished rentals? Is that anything that you're hearing chatter about in your space?
Yeah. Two things that we don't do: short-term rentals and furnished rentals. So I don't play in either sandbox. So I don't really have my ear to the ground on that. So I really don't have anything I can share. I'm sorry. It's very, very rare that you find me without anything to say. I don't really have anything to say on that other than I don't.
Aaron, you win an award that you actually stumped Danny Hardiman. And he has nothing to say.
So did Gabriel. I don't do short-term rentals. So
yes, no. So on both of those, I think the other thing, hey, Gabriel's sending you a message. Look at that, Danny. So look out for that. We've got some great classes that are going to be coming up too. So if any of the people that are on the chat are licensed realtors, you don't have to be a member of MetroTax, but we will drop in the chat a link to some fantastic courses that are coming. The Fundamentals of Leasing. That's going to be on February 21st from 9 to 4. That will be a virtual event. So even if you're in other areas of the state, that's still something that you can attend. Writing the lease agreement, lease application, how to develop criteria, lease marketing techniques, different things like that. So I think that's a great opportunity for licensees and realtors to actually educate themselves, and you do a fantastic job on doing that. And then we also have leasing agency and forms on the 22nd from 9 to 4. That's agency and leasing and liability, and a deep dive into the lease agreement. And so both of those things would definitely be helpful for any of our licensed realtors to take. And I'll tell you right now, Danny has this much energy in a 7-hour class, just as much as he has on this call right now. Yes, we've got an awesome info. Thank you both. It's been a great evening where we've been able to, this was a really meaty one. And I love that, bringing this information in real time effect. So guys, we are going to bring this to you in a more updated fashion. And so like Danny said, it's kind of early on in the legislative session. And so we'll definitely come back here in several weeks and report back. And as we hear things coming down the pike, man, Danny, as usual, you are always one of my best guests. Look at all of this stuff that we're getting.
Ashley, you can keep lying to me all you want.
I love it. Okay, last bit of tidbit. Anything else that you want to leave all of our watchers with this evening?
No, just continue to educate yourself. If you are a licensed agent, educate. The most educated agents get the business. Okay. Yes. If you can talk the lingo, you will close the deal. I'm telling you. If you're getting into my space, start by taking those classes. Yep. Even if you just want to learn how to craft a lease, take the second one, the agency and forms. That's a deep dive into the lease agreement. We spend 3 hours just on the lease.
That's great.
And I see some of the worst written leases out there. So come learn how to do it the right way. but just keep educating yourself and you'll be extremely successful. You'll be in that top 5%.
Fantastic. Roger, it was good to see you, sir, in the chat. Hopefully we'll get to see each other in person soon. But Danny, thank you so much for an amazing evening of education, laughs, and maybe some scares. But hey, I will see you at the Texas Realtors winter meeting in Austin this weekend. And if any of the people in the chat are going to be there as well, try to come find myself or Danny, and we'd love to hear from you. So Danny, enjoy the rest of your evening, man. And I will see you this weekend.
You too.
Bye.
Take care, guys.